Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, by next week, we should know more about the status of our liberties as tension builds within the public and among elected officials. We'll look at the latest on the COVID crisis, including one parish's plan for re-entry and the status of schools and healthcare. We'll also look at the legislature, which has reconvened after imposing its own hiatus, and the Hard Rock demolition, which will now take some historic buildings with it. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Dave Cohen, the news director for WWL Radio, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Tyler Bridges, reporter for the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go over to Dave first, because we're supposed to be getting some updates coming up in the next few days or so about reopening the area from both governor and from local officials too. So what is it looking like for us?
Well, the numbers look really good. Today's numbers especially were fantastic. There were barely 200 new cases reported statewide today, and that has been with the continuing decrease, or at least plateauing, of the new numbers of cases. Hospitalizations are down, ventilator use is down, the number of new deaths most days has been down. So things are all pointing in the right direction for Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards on Monday, hopefully, to announce that he will be, in fact, reopening or entering phase one of reopening of the government in Louisiana. Now, he said he and his team are going to huddle all weekend. They're going to go over the numbers very carefully and break everything down to make sure they meet all the criteria set forth in the White House task force advisories and information that they've provided the state. We weren't quite there to do it on May 1st, so hopefully we will be on May 15th, and we'll find out on Monday. But there's only one outlier right now. According to the Public Affairs Research Council, which today released a new breakdown of the numbers that they've analyzed, only the parishes on the North Shore are still seeing increasing cases. Everywhere else in the state, it's plateauing or dropping.
By parishes on the North Shore, you mean like St. Tammany and Tangipahoa, Washington?
Yeah,
is that in the region? And okay,
Yeah, that whole region. So everywhere else, the numbers are good. In fact, today, New Orleans reported 0 deaths. Jefferson Parish reported 1 death, and there were less than 20 deaths statewide reported today. And those are kinds of numbers that we have not seen that low, but they have been trending downward. So today, the governor has been unveiling the plan for contact tracing, which the mayor talked about earlier in the week and drew a lot of controversy. Mayor LaToya Cantrell in New Orleans said part of her contact tracing plan is going to include requiring businesses to maintain records of everybody who comes in their doors, their contact information and their names. And we've seen the business community and privacy advocates come out very strongly against that plan. The governor had indicated and the Department of Health had indicated statewide that won't be the plan, but the health department said that individual parishes and regions can do what they think is best.
So it seems like, we're heading in the right direction right now. We're seeing the numbers lowering, which is really good. Time to begin to start opening up. But there's still a lot of concern about that. We still really need to be cautious, and that contact tracing, they say, is really an important part of this. It's integral to trying to keep our numbers down.
And not only is the fact that they're going to do it integral, it's going to depend on the community to actually follow the advice and the recommendations of the contact tracers. There's going to be 700 Louisiana employees that have been brought in. They're going to be in 3 call centers around the state, and their job is going to be every time someone tests positive, they call them. And then they trace where have they been, who have they been with, who have they come into contact with, who could they potentially have infected. And then they call all those people. And they tell them, you've been in contact with someone who's tested positive for the coronavirus, for COVID-19. So at this time, you need to go into a self-quarantine for 14 days. Yeah. It's dependent on those people to do that for this to work.
And Dave, the other important element of this is testing. Every time I talk about this, I say, we got to get testing. We got to get testing up to a certain level to be able to maintain this.
Yeah, without the testing, the contact tracing does no good, because you have to know people have it first, then trace their contacts and move forward from there. The governor said that they got 200,000 tests promised from the White House for this month alone, and those have already started to arrive. So we're on the right path to do 200,000 tests a month in Louisiana.
And Dave, at the same time, there's been a legislative committee trying to override the governor on no matter what he says. Is that still a factor, or could it be that the governor will come out with something that satisfies the legislature?
Well, the legislators, particularly the Republican legislators, have been mounting this effort to try and force the governor's hand to start the reopening process. The congressional delegation also has sent an advisory, a letter to the governor urging the same thing, saying they believe that the state has met the criteria. So he's facing a lot of outside pressure, particularly from Republicans. We'll see on Monday if he feels the numbers justify starting phase one.
Okay, we're going to be talking to Tyler a little bit more about that too, but right now I'm going to switch over to Dawn, because certainly, schools and kids now really losing the last part of this school year. What are we hearing? Will there be anything opening up, maybe midsummer? I mean, any news out there about this?
There is a new plan called Strong Start 2020. The state has gotten a bunch of federal dollars, and those federal dollars have been distributed around the state to ensure that when the next school year does start, that they have adequate testing and resources to figure out where each and every student is and to get those students where they need to be in their next academic year. There's going to be huge discrepancies around the state because certain districts have done a better job of learning at home. Private schools have done a fantastic job in some cases of learning at home. Some students really have had a packet and do it or not do it. No new learning really since schools closed on March 13th. So it's going to be a really tricky job for teachers and administrators to make sure everybody is on the same playing field when school starts. So there are those new resources that have been made available as of today. In terms of summer schooling, we really don't have any answers yet. We also don't have any answers yet on whether or not the school start date will change in the fall and get kids back to school just a teeny bit earlier. We start so early here in New Orleans already, or in the South already. I think the school start date is August 10th. I don't know how much farther back you can even push it, or if we'll be able to gather. Around the country, you hear maybe we'll have staggered school days, and some kids will go to school Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and other kids will go Tuesday, Thursday, and then they'll flop the next week to make sure that we can maintain social distancing. Some kids might go in the morning, some in the afternoons. There are plans all over the place. There's nothing that's been made truly concrete yet. The one thing that all of the districts are still trying to do, aside from educate kids, is feed children, because that's such an important place where kids get their needs met by government resources. And they're continuing to do that. They're continuing in Orleans Parish to provide free access to the internet for children who don't otherwise have it. But it's still, in terms of education, a lot more questions than answers. You see people being incredibly creative, though, with parades for graduates. You saw in Slidell last week, the kids got up in the sunroofs of their cars and hanging out their windows and rolled through their streets in their caps and gowns to try to celebrate rituals that have just disappeared for right now.
Also, we're coming into our summer, and each year, of course, kids go to summer camps. There are just tons and trillions of summer camps around, day camps, some overnight camps. Any camps are going to be held? Are we hearing it all? I mean, I keep hearing of no camps,
I keep hearing about camps that get canceled and keep hearing about camps that get canceled. I have heard my children are at Trinity Episcopal and Christian Brothers School. And in both cases, for those two schools, they've said, we're trying to go forward. We're trying to figure it out. We're going to limit how many children can sign up. We're going to have lots more hand washing than usual. They're trying to delay making any announcements on whether or not they actually are going to have to cancel, giving people hope. But it may be that there's nothing for children this summer, which creates a nightmare for people who need to work and don't have childcare for their kids. But if schools continue to be one of the last things on that reopening list, schools and childcare centers, then there's not much these schools and camps can do to get open.
You're a parent, you have kids at home, and I know other parents with kids at home. My grandkids are at home. What are we hearing from parents generally out there? Has this been just really hard on them, or is it a time really just to kind of savor because they're having all this time with their kids?
I think you're hearing a whole lot more appreciation for teachers than ever before, for sure. You definitely have that. This week has been Teacher Appreciation Week, and I've seen lots of really fun things to appreciate the teachers in our lives. It's also I mean, I've talked to my own kids who are devastated that they're missing the end of their school year, but I've said, what have you liked about this? And by and large, the answer I get is more family time, more time to try or do other things that maybe I wouldn't have had before because I would have had homework and maybe a sports practice and been in school for 8 hours. And instead, they can ride their bikes every day. They can try a new hobby. They are enjoying that extra time.
Yeah. Okay, but I'm sure everybody will be ready to go to school when finally it does happen. Okay, Dawn. Thanks a lot. All right, Tyler, let's jump over to you because legislature is meeting. They were on hiatus for a while because of COVID-19, but they're back there meeting, and they've got a lot of big things before them. What's going on there?
Well, the first thing I would say is I was in Baton Rouge on Wednesday, and how strange it is. The Capitol usually has a lot of people in it, and there weren't very many people in there at all. You know, someone had to take your temperature first to get in there. And then, as I said, you don't see many people in there. And the other thing that was striking to me is how legislators and lobbyists and people are all sort of typically clustered around each other in small groups, a lot of whispers, a lot of short conversations. People aren't doing that right now because we need to maintain social distancing.
Social distance, yeah.
And the other interesting thing is, I guess everything is partisan these days, and it was striking the number of Republican legislators who were not wearing masks in the Capitol.
Really? So are they social distancing, or are they still seated closely next to one another, or are they spaced out the seating arrangement?
They put a plastic glass between legislators who sit together at desks, but it does seem that the Republicans are less believing in the value of social distancing than the Democrats.
Well, as Errol and
amazing
Dave
that
both
that is a
touched,
political issue. That wearing a mask or not wearing a mask has become a political issue in this environment is amazing to me. We had one person suggest, though, that perhaps there should be a mask area and a non-mask area, kind of like there used to be smoking areas and non-smoking areas, so that people who don't want to wear masks, let them sit and infect each other, but not spread it to the people around them.
Okay, that's something to consider. Tyler, back to you. Let's get back to what Errol and Dave had noted about some GOP legislator opposition to the governor's rules of, our stay-at-home order and what can be open, what cannot be, et cetera. What do you see in there?
Yeah, I have to think that it's more political than anything else. The measure was approved by the first step of the legislative process. It's going to take at least a week or so before it could go through the full legislature, and by about that time, it looks like the governor is going to be opening everything out. It may be what's known in Baton Rouge as a come-to-me measure, which is the legislators are unhappy with the governor, and this is a way that they signal this to him. But there's certainly something that politics is involved in that.
What are some of the other issues that are confronting right now? So, for example, the parish lawsuits against oil and gas. There's some legislation moving through regarding that. Is there?
Yeah, that was approved Thursday night, the first step of the legislative process. This is a bill that would kill the lawsuits filed by the parishes against the oil and gas companies, accusing them of having caused destruction of the wetlands, and they would have to pay for it. That is potentially billions and billions of dollars at stake. I think that's something the governor would oppose, and that could be the eventual roadblock to that. There's also some spending measures or anti-spending measures pushed by conservatives that have pushed in previous years. They're now trying to say that with the state having less money, this is a really good time to limit how much the state can spend.
Speaking about that, about the state having less money, I mean, there's just less revenue coming in. So are they starting to get a handle on what the deficit's going to be?
Well, we will get that handle on Monday when something called the Revenue Estimating Conference meets, and that will issue the estimate of how much money is available, and that will then determine the budget going forward for the legislature. So that's an important meeting.
That certainly would be an important meeting because, I mean, there is a lot less revenue right now coming in. People aren't going out there. Sales taxes aren't coming in.
And also the condition of the oil industry. We get the double whammy with the decline in tourism and the big hit on oil.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the budget picture is pretty bleak right now for the state.
So is there going to be a special session? I mean, is that the thought now, that there will be a special session to handle this budget issue? Because this session has to adjourn, June 1st? There's not much time left to this session. Is that right?
Yeah, they really only have to do one thing, which is approve the budget. But even if they approve the budget by June 1st, which I think is doubtful, they'll come back in a special session later this year as it gets clear exactly how much money is available. We still don't know how much money from the federal government will help the state, and maybe maybe the economy begins to pick up. So it's going to be an ongoing issue.
Okay, Tyler, thanks a lot. We'll be looking for what's coming out of Baton Rouge. Errol, over to you. Jefferson Parish making a plan for reopening its businesses.
Yeah, as is everybody, but the reason we're talking about Jefferson Parish is because a week from today, on the 15th, the governor's current plan is supposed to expire. It was implemented to go through the 15th. Monday, the governor has said he is going to announce what that new plan will be effective the 15th. So what's been happening, what's starting to happen, is some of the local governments are getting together and kind of like giving a hint of what they believe in, what their plan should be. Mayor Cantrell in New Orleans, I think it's going to have a radio thing on WBOK Tuesday morning to talk about it. But Jefferson Parish was first of the major parishes, of the large ones. And it was a coalition of businesses with JEDCO, the Jefferson Parish Economic Development, and the Chamber of Commerce in Jefferson. And what they're proposing, and part of this follows the federal guidelines, is, they have this phase 1, 2, and 3. And part of the issue deals around people density, business density. And there was a study that Johns Hopkins did, talking about density in different businesses. And like bars were seen as being a business that's inherently dense, and it's hard to change the rules that it won't be dense. And so bars are kind of getting shoved down the list. But what Jefferson Parish is recommending, and they say things are always subject to change, is that as of next week, after this current order is no longer in effect, most businesses will be allowed to open in Jefferson Parish, except for bars, casinos, entertainment businesses, organized youth activities, and events of over more than 10 people, which includes festivals. Restaurants will be able to open, however, they can only have 20% occupancy. I was at a meeting yesterday with a banker who says it's impossible for a restaurant to make money with 25% occupancy. But maybe if they stagger it throughout the day, maybe there's a way to do it. And so I think if this follows forms, we will start seeing some meaningful changes. Phase 2, once that comes, and again, it all depends on that curve, on the number of testing and how people feel things are going. Once phase 2 comes, pretty much everything else will be able to open, except for events. You can't have events more than 50 people, and then restaurants can have 50% occupancy, restaurants and gyms.
Still, then what do you do with schools then that are always going to have, unless they're tiny little schools, you'll have more than 50 people?
That's true. Okay, yeah. Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah, and the other problem is, are people even going to show up? You can say a restaurant is open 25% or 50 people can be in this location, but are people going to be ready? Are they going to feel like it's safe to go to these places? And will it even matter if there's rules if nobody shows up?
Well, I can tell you, I for sure will be there. I've already decided what I'm going to order, where I'm going to go and what I'm going to order, so I'm ready. And look, restaurants are something.
Where are you going to go? Where are you going to go?
Restaurants are something that people.
I'm not going to tell you.
The steak knife off of Harrison Avenue. Okay. And so start with a Sazerac. Okay. But restaurants are something that are really endearing to people. They're really important within the community. And I don't think it's going to be any problem with people rushing to restaurants once they open. And then phase 3, which will come later, most of the restrictions will be gone. The big difference is that event size is still limited, but now up to 250 people. The big question is, when does phase 3 leave? Because that's going to influence things like attendance at games, at sports events. And it's really influenced some of the thinking about Mardi Gras also. So I think it looks like all indications are that next week we'll see the first of the 3 phases.
And also, I think that for restaurants, for example, I think that they're going to have to post a notice outside of their business, outside of their establishment, telling the public what safety precautions they are taking. So,
yeah, that's going to be distancing. I guess they're going to have to work by reservations, I mean, how else can you control, that
People coming in.
that kind of crowd flow? But again, if you do several sets a night, maybe you can make money off of it.
Well,
To answer your question about when we'll be done with phase 3, that's going to depend when there's either a very effective treatment or a way to vaccinate. Because before
right.
you get that, or it just magically goes away, there's no way we can ever get out of phase 3 until one of those things happens.
All right, still much to discover on this whole journey of COVID-19. David, let's stick with you and the latest on the Hard Rock demolition. Some other buildings are going to go with it, huh?
Yeah, we could actually start to see demolition at the Hard Rock site next week if everything goes according to what we're hearing from everyone who is telling us now. Now, I won't believe it till I see it, but the emergency order from the New Orleans Fire Department this week calling for the demolition of 3 buildings adjacent to the Hard Rock Hotel construction site has cleared the way. That was the last hurdle that we knew of that was there. Everybody else is on the same page. Everything else seems to be going right. The Historic Districts Landmark Commission has said they will acquiesce and not try to stop the demolition of these 3 buildings, even though they have historical value. And because of the emergency order from the city, we expect that those 3 buildings will start coming down first, and then the traditional demolition of the Hard Rock will begin, with the goal of also recovering the remains of the 2 men who are still inside.
Dave, I think the big surprise, though, that nobody really expected was using the fire department as the way to get around those buildings, because the conversation has always been, well, we need the Historic District Landmark Commission to allow this to happen. And all of a sudden said, we can't wait for them. The fire department says it's a hazard, and then that permit was issued.
Yeah, I think that the legal minds came together and realized, wait a minute, we don't have to go through a public hearing. We don't have to have the Historic Districts Landmark Commission hold this whole dramatic, emotional hearing and have people coming forward trying to stop this. Someone realized, wait a minute, we can just do this by an emergency order from the fire department. So they did, and that has apparently cleared the way. Now, I'm not saying there won't be any legal hurdles, that someone won't come up with a lawsuit to try and stop it, but at this point, everything appears to be on track to start demolition next week.
It kind of reminds me when they started taking the monuments down and they had these guys show up with these ski masks on, and people didn't know who they were. And it turns out it was the fire department that was there in case there was some kind of a problem. So again, the fire departments become like special forces on these sorts of things. And even on these new rules in terms of who's going to implement, who's going to oversee what occupancy level that you have in the restaurants, a lot of places it's going to be the fire department.
Yeah, and the fire marshal has already said that the state fire marshal is going to oversee it statewide. I think that's just because they happen to be in a position to already enforce these kinds of things. They happen to, they already have occupancy rules as relates to the fire marshal and the fire department. So it was just kind of easier to let them handle it. There's no playbook for this, so they're just kind of figuring it out as they go along.
Back to those other historic buildings that are going to be coming down, preservationists are asking that anything that is historically sensitive, architecturally valuable, they try to salvage it and not just destroy everything.
And I think that's a reasonable request, but I don't know if it's a doable request, because the way they're talking about demolishing these buildings and the timetable on which they want to do it, the mayor is putting pressure on. She says it's time. It's got to happen now. So to try and do that, to try and salvage piece by piece parts of these buildings and set it aside instead of just using a wrecking ball to knock it down, I don't know how realistic that is.
Well, we'll see. When is this going to start, do you think?
We're hearing Wednesday, but nothing's set in stone at this point.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dave. Dawn, over to you. Healthcare in our area. I mean, a lot of things were sort of put on hold because of all of the focus on COVID-19, elective surgeries, et cetera. But that's starting up again.
That started up within the last 2 weeks, and you will see a lot of changes if you do go to those routine appointments. I, for instance, had a routine mammogram that got pushed back, and I went and had it this week. And the facility at Turo, LCMC Health, was staggered. So there were chairs and seats. You had to sit several chairs apart from people. When you walked in, you got your temperature taken the woman reached the thermometer around a plexiglass screen and gave our temperature a check at a distance. Everything was done at a distance. Everybody had to wear masks. But the place was full and busy, and that's the message these healthcare facilities are trying to get out. Don't put off your routine screenings, your regular healthcare, and especially don't put off the trips that need to be taken to the ER. They've seen lower numbers of people coming in with heart attacks and strokes and that sort of thing because people are scared to come in. And it is now we're heading into High Blood Pressure Awareness Month and Stroke Awareness Month, and they want folks to know that if you have signs and symptoms, you need to get help. They have segregated the COVID areas or the presumptive COVID areas from regular health care. There are screenings, everything's being done with an extra level of concern to make sure people aren't spreading germs to one another, but they want to make sure people are still getting their routine screenings and that you're not seeing other conditions worsen. If you're someone with skin cancer and you had regular checkups with your dermatologist, you can go back to your dermatologist now, and you should. If you're having heart issues, you can go in and you should. So that's the message. All of these, Ochsner, LCMC, they're saying, please come back. And, I talked with one radiologist friend who said he's super busy because all of a sudden everybody who had put stuff off is now coming in. So, and the younger doctors are working more than the older doctors who are still fearful of getting COVID-19.
So the hospitals and doctors, they're starting to see the community respond to the fact that they can now start getting back more to regular health care?
Yes, they are coming in and be expected. Sometimes you might wait in your car and get a phone call that says, okay, come on, you can come in now. We're ready for you. You can wait in your car, you wait with a mask on, you have hand washing stations everywhere you go. And it's different, and that it may always be different. It was a different experience for me this week trying to talk back and forth.
Right.
Both of us masked. Usually that's the kind of appointment where you chit chat with the person doing your appointment, and there was
not the case.
No chit-chat this week.
New world for healthcare too, just a regular everyday healthcare. Okay, wrapping this up. As far as what you guys personally would like in terms of non-essential businesses opening, aside from restaurants, what would you like to see come first? E, let's go to you.
Well, let me say come first. What I'm looking forward to is the day when we're past the crowd size limit, the day we can get rid of that 250 people, which is the ultimate, and start having events and festivals. And I think that'll be a real sign that we've returned.
Tyler?
Yeah, I'm still recovering from not being able to go to French Quarter Festival and Jazz Festival, but I think the next thing I'd like to be able to do is to start going to the gym again.
All righty, Dawn?
I would like to be able to get a little closer than 6 feet. I miss hugging my friends and relatives, but I'm really looking forward to the hair salon reopening too.
All righty. David, what about you?
Well, with the release of the Saints schedule this week, I would just love to be able to go back in the Superdome and high-five people and enjoy watching a game. I don't think we're going to be able to do that anytime soon, but you're asking what we'd like to be able to do. That's what I would really love to be able to do.
And being the grandmom that I am, I just want hugs from my grandkids instead of just blowing them kisses from afar, which I'll do right now. Okay, thanks, guys. Thank you all for joining us from your different locations. Thank you all for joining us, too, for Informed Sources. And we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.